So listen to this. Who is the greatest English wonderkid of all time? Well, there are two obvious answers to that question, Michael Owen and Wayne Rooney, but who came after them? I mean, I feel like you could easily argue there's been no one like them since, but I have a name for you. Daniel Sturridge. It's a travesty that he went down as only some guy who the streets won't forget. He was, in my opinion, the most naturally gifted English footballer of his generation. At his peak, he was good enough to drag Liverpool out of their banter era, to jumpstart their new footballing dynasty, to make some fans believe that Luis Suarez, maybe the greatest striker of the decade, was replaceable. 44 goal contributions in 43 matches, a better start than Mbappe at PSG, only 3 short of CR7's start at Real Madrid, 5 better than his start at Juve. But those numbers don't even paint the full picture. After all, he could be just a great goal scorer, but no, this man had everything. He was a full-on superstar, a blockbuster striker banging screamers week in, week out, some of the most incredible goals you'll ever see. He had every kid in the country imitating his celebration, but only for 15 months. After that, there was nothing but chaos surrounding him, and before it, things weren't much different. Sturridge grew up supporting Derby County, watching from the stands as his uncle, Dean Sturridge, became their record goal scorer in the Premier League era. However, he wasn't his biggest influence. That was his father. Michael was one of the top talents at Birmingham. At one point, he was in talks with United and Arsenal, but they convinced him to stay. But then, sacked 5 managers in just a couple of years, and among the chaos, he was left behind, forgotten in their academy without ever being given his debut. It traumatized him so much that, according to his own son, he has never spoken about it. But I found his tapes. I saw with my own eyes how good he was. That's what drove me to want to be one of the greats. Though his father's influence wasn't all positive. Sure, he trained him from a young age, he put him into his first academy at 7, and thanks to that, a year later, he was already getting scouted by Aston Villa. But that's where the problems began. His father used him as leverage to force the club to give him a part-time scouting job, and once Sturridge hit 14 years of age, and it became clear he was a one-in-a-million talent, he began threatening the club that if they didn't make him a full-time scout, he'd pull his son from their academy. And he did. He went ahead and actually took him to Coventry City, already getting the courts involved as Villa claimed they were owed compensation for this transfer, only to be denied and watch as Coventry fell down the same hole, as just a year later his father moved Sturridge to Man City, starting up a whole new court battle, as this time City were actually forced to pay up, though it very quickly paid off, since as soon as they put Sturridge into the Nike Cup, the biggest academy tournament on the planet, with 8,000 teams across 43 countries fighting for one title, he became only the second ever player to take both the top scorer and player of the tournament awards. The other was Carlos Tevez. And the thing is, then Sturridge was just as dominant in seemingly every other youth tournament he ever played in. The next year, alongside Micah Richards, who was just bursting onto the scene. Despite being the youngest in the team, Sturridge scored 6 goals, 2 of them in the final, even though they ended up losing 3-2, and already they were making him sign his first professional contract at 16. Still, on his first season training with the first team, though they weren't planning on it, a hat-trick for the reserves pretty much forced City into giving him his debut, but just as he prepared to make history, a hip injury sidelined him for the rest of the year. After that, despite them not having a single player who could score more than 7 goals in a season, and Sturridge opening his tally with an absolute worldie and then making it 2 goals in his 2 games back, they became worried the hype was getting to his head, claiming that people were shouting from the rooftops just because he scored twice in 2 matches. So they sent him back to play another FA Youth Cup, and he proceeded to lead them to the final again, this time as the tournament's top scorer, becoming the only one to ever score in the FA Youth Cup, the actual FA Cup, and the Premier League in a single season. Then, getting their only goal in the final's first leg, being called up to the first team only to get injured within 25 minutes, somehow getting fit in time for the second leg and scoring another to hand them the title, even though their opponents, Chelsea, had spent twice their academy's annual budget on a single youth player. Because, remember, this was before the oil money arrived. In fact, it was right before it did. Just as Sturridge's moment seemed to be within his grasp, Sheikh Mansour took over the club. The young Zabaleta, Company and Robinho came in, and I know what you're thinking. Robinho and Sturridge side by side sounds like it could be phenomenal, but that was just not their plan. Even Joe, a major flop that would be loaned out to Everton in the winter market, ended up getting more minutes in his 6 months at the club than Sturridge over the full season, and though by the end, it seemed they had realized the mistake they were making, handing Sturridge the club's Young Player of the Year award regardless, it was already too late. Rightfully fearing the impact the second wave of signings could have on the club, as indeed they would sign 3 more forwards in Santa Cruz, Adebayor and Tevez, Sturridge did it again. He refused to renew his contract, quickly joined Chelsea on a free deal and stirred up a third-court battle, with City ironically insisting they were owed a development fee for the years he spent in their academy, somehow eventually winning the lawsuit and settling for £8.3 million. Regardless, at Chelsea, things wouldn't be easy either. He was fighting Anelka and Drogba for a place in the team, very much watching from the sidelines as they won the league and cup double, and the second year, it only got worse, with Abramovich insisting on the signing of Fernando Torres and consequently forcing the staff to ship off Sturridge to Bolton on loan, where he would immediately get every football analyst to go after Abramovich, as Torres would become notorious as one of the Premier League's greatest ever flops, while Sturridge balled out at Bolton, becoming only the 6th player in history to score in all of his first 4 matches for an English club, eventually hitting 8 goals in 12 games, getting embarrassingly close to being their top scorer despite arriving midway through the year. Then, obviously, coming back to Chelsea as their new manager Villas-Boas found a place for him, even if out of position, as he tried to rejuvenate his squad, instantly leading him to score one of the goals of the season on his first match back, hitting 13 goal contributions by December, close to 1 per 90 minutes on the pitch, prompting Capello to call him up to the national team for the first time, only for Di Matteo to replace Villas-Boas and completely freeze him out of the squad as he insisted on bringing the more veteran players back into the fold, affording Sturridge only 8 minutes of game time from the last 16 onwards as he led his teammates to the Champions League title. So after 6 more months consistently putting down numbers whenever he was given a sliver of a chance, only to be benched again the very next game, Sturridge would admit that, at that time, I was scared I would be lost to the game. I had fallen out of love with football. The only solution was to move again, and ironically, guess who gave him the chance he needed? Liverpool, the team that sold Fernando Torres to Abramovich. However, that same irony would follow him to his new club, as reportedly he was also a board signing, as Brendan Rodgers wanted Clint Dempsey in his place. After all, it would be easy to argue that Suarez and Sturridge were far too similar and goal-hungry to play together, though, in fact, we were all incredibly wrong. Forced to accommodate for both, Brendan Rodgers settled for a diamond-ish 4-3-1-2, referring to Sturridge as a 9.5, and the result was something else. 7 minutes into his debut, he had his first goal. The next match, he came at halftime to score against United, and in his first league start, he scored another to become the first since Ray Kennedy in 1974 to score in his first 3 matches for Liverpool. 2 weeks after that, he was banging in a screamer against City, and though he'd missed almost 4 weeks through injury between February and March, by the time he came back, it was Suarez who was out after biting Ivanovic and getting suspended by the FA, so playing as the main striker for the first time in his career, Sturridge managed to close out the season with 8 goal contributions in 6 matches, even banging a hat-trick against Fulham. Suddenly, Sturridge was the owner of one of the most exceptional stat lines in the league, a goal or assist every 88 minutes over his first season with Liverpool, and though his partnership with Suarez was quickly put in jeopardy as the Uruguayan went on strike trying to force his way out of the club, claiming he could not deal with the media's persecution of his family following the infamous bite, he ended up staying, and thank God, because forget the classic playmaker and finisher duo, this was much more fun. 2 complete forwards simultaneously playing off of each other and competing for who could score the most, just absolute cinema. Regardless, with Suarez still serving his ban for the first 6 matches of the new season, Sturridge put down 6 more goals to make it 14 goal contributions in his 12 matches as a solo striker, going as far as taking the league's Player of the Month award. And even when Suarez was back, it just kept going. 3 goals and 2 assists over the next 3 games, and the very next one, as Suarez put down a hat-trick trying to assert his dominance, Sturridge then hit back by scoring an unbelievable chip from outside the box. And even once a thigh injury ruled him out for 10 days, once Liverpool found themselves trailing behind in a Merseyside derby with 11 minutes left on the clock, they resorted to bring him in regardless, and seconds before the final whistle, he showed up with a header clinching the draw, even if then he'd compromised his ankle as well, ending up on the sidelines for an extra month and a half. But even then, to double down on his claim that not even his injury problems could stop him, the moment Liverpool found themselves struggling again, only leading against Stoke thanks to a penalty and an own goal, he was brought in again, quickly assisting Gerrard to double their lead and scoring himself just 2 minutes after Stoke got another goal back. Then, if all that I've already told you wasn't absurd enough, to truly establish his season as one of the all-time greatest goal-scoring performances, he started dribbling and lobbing keepers like it was nothing, immediately going on an 8-match goal-scoring streak, only the second ever in Premier League history aside from Van Nistelrooy. Not Shearer, not Rooney, not Ronaldo, not even Suarez. It was up to 26 goal contributions in 23 matches, even with all the injuries, long before the rise of the BBC and the MSN, the Premier League at the SAS. Sturridge and Suarez, undoubtedly one of the greatest ever attacking duos, quite literally outscoring all but 4 of the Premier League clubs all by themselves. Though, at this point, with Liverpool already expecting the Suarez drama to come back to bite them, the narrative from Brendan Rodgers was clear. He believed Sturridge did not even need his partner. In his own words, he has every tool and every quality he needs to be as good as Suarez. But though by the end of February, he was again the league's Player of the Month, after a couple more goals in March and one of the most ridiculous assists I've ever laid my eyes on, as Liverpool led the league with 3 games left, Gerrard slipped, and despite the SAS sitting side by side at the top of the goal scorers table, having scored more than half of Liverpool's goals all season, they lost out on the league title, and Suarez was left in tears because they knew that without that title, history would be much quicker to forget them, only remembered as those who ran so that Mane, Salah and Firmino could fly. As expected, after scoring against Italy in the World Cup, Sturridge came back to see that Suarez had moved on to Barcelona, and now the one beside him was Balotelli. But that wouldn't even be his biggest problem. Only 3 matches in, Sturridge injured his thigh and once deemed fit. Before he even got to play another game, his calf went out as well, and when that was fixed, it was his thigh again. 5 months without a single game, 32 matches missed, and after only 5 more starts, a hip problem popped up, forcing him into surgery and another 5 months of recovery. Still, Klopp's arrival the next year was a source of hope for many, as he claimed he wanted to build his project around the trio of Firmino, Coutinho and Sturridge, but well, that was pretty much impossible once a knee injury sidelined him in October, a foot injury in November and then his hamstring in December, meaning that, as much as his 7 goal contributions in 7 matches upon his comeback were enough to buy him the time to pop off in their Europa League campaign, scoring in the last 16 against United, coming into the second leg of their semi-finals having missed the first, and putting on a man of the match performance with a goal and assist to mount a comeback and put them in the final where it opened up the scoring with a trivela, setting up one of the greatest redemption arcs imaginable. In the end, Sevilla came back to take the title, and even if he had just become the second fastest player in the modern era to reach 50 goals with Liverpool, only 3 games slower than Torres despite all the injuries and substitute appearances, the overall consensus at the club was that, as Klopp said, Sturridge needs to learn what is an actual injury and what is only pain. The most obvious thing to everyone's eyes was that as much as the injuries had broken his body, they had, above all, broken his psyche. He was so scared of the next stare, he was pulling his punches. Once one of the fastest players on the planet, now he had gone full seasons without ever being the fastest on the pitch. He had missed 614 days of the previous 1121. It could not be relied upon. So that summer's last-minute goal against Wales at the Euros was his final hurrah. Only 26, he had only 38 starts left in the tank before retiring, only 8 full 90s. The next season, Mane came and quickly became only some kind of impact sub. The year after that, even with a goal contribution every 85 minutes for the few matches he played, he was deemed as surplus thanks to the introduction of Salah, and his last-ditch loan move to West Bromwich after failed attempts to join Inter and Sevilla not only exposed the state he was in, getting injured after 78 minutes on the pitch and never starting for the club again, but ended up coming back to haunt him, as once he made it back to Liverpool and began raising some eyebrows, getting some numbers on the board, scoring the goal of the month against Chelsea, even getting one against PSG without which they wouldn't even have made it out their group, and going relatively injury-free as he went on to become the first English player to win 2 Champions League titles with 2 different English clubs, even if he was an unused sub in both finals. Then it happened. Only 3 days after the final, he was released by Liverpool as it was quickly made public that he would be serving a ban for breaching betting regulations, having told his brother to put money on his supposed loan to Sevilla. And no matter how much Klopp made sure to insist that he has the right to be considered a modern-time Liverpool great, that he is one of the greatest finishers I've ever seen a player who'd score goals you thought to be impossible. Only 16 games and 10 goal contributions into his time at Trabzonspor, the FA won an appeal in favor of extending his ban to 4 months, and it killed him. The club terminated his contract just as the pandemic hit, and by the time he had gotten back on his feet, he had gone almost 2 years without playing, and a Hail Mary of a move to Australia ended up as the last nail in his coffin, with only 5 games in his first 6 months being capped off with yet another injury, being let go as they claimed he simply wasn't capable of ever making a return to football.